Republican Senator Susan Collins, after a course of criticism, continued to defend her decision to support Brett Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court last night on 60 Minutes.
I believed that a sexual assault had happened to her. What I think she's mistaken about is who the perpetrator was. I do not believe her assailant was Brett Kavanaugh.
Again, that's despite Dr. Ford dispelling that idea of mistaken identity when she testified.
Dr. Ford, with what degree of certainty do you believe Brett Kavanaugh assaulted you?
100%.
Tarana Burke is the founder of the Me Too movement. Always good to have you. Thanks for coming in. Let's start there with Susan Collins. Were you surprised to hear that from a Republican senator who's a female?
I'm surprised to hear it from anybody who listened to Dr. Blasey Ford testify last week. I can't believe that she would say that she's mistaken about her assailant. Like, that's the one thing that we are, as survivors, never really mistaken by when we look them in their face.
I wanted to get your take on something while you're here. It's been 1 year since Me Too gained national attention. This idea that the Kavanaugh confirmation is a setback for Me Too. Do you see it as a setback for the movement? Do you see it as a stepping stone for the movement, or do you see it being somewhat unrelated to it?
No, it's definitely related. I don't see it as a setback. I think people need to understand what movements are, right? This is a long fight. Sexual violence is pervasive, and the depth and breadth of what is done in this country, we have not even begun to unpack. Him being confirmed is certainly depressing, and it's unfortunate. And for those of us who are fighting to stop the confirmation, it's not a win. But for the movement overall, what has also happened is that survivors have been galvanized, and those who support us and allies have been galvanized around the country around this issue. And I think it has given us an opportunity to show that survivors are more than just a group of people to pity, but that we are a constituency and a power base.
Do you think that his confirmation makes it less likely that assault victims will speak out?
No. I think that Dr. Blasey Ford coming forth in the way that she did, so courageous and just so honest in her testimony, will help people to understand that the outcome may not always be what you want, but there is still power in coming forward and giving voice to your accusations. North
Dakota Republican Senate candidate, it's a guy named Kevin Cramer. He's right now leading Heidi Heitkamp by, at last check, about 12 points. He was talking about the Me Too movement in the New York Times, and this is what he said in part. Invoking his wife, daughters, mother, and mother-in-law, Mr. Cramer said, "They cannot understand this movement toward victimization. They are pioneers of the prairie. These are tough people whose grandparents were tough and great-grandparents were tough." Do you think that the Me Too movement, does it resonate the same in major metropolitan areas like New York City, like Chicago, like Boston? Does it resonate the same way in places like that as it does in other parts of the country? Is there some sort of geographic divide?
I can't imagine that there's a geographic divide. This is about people's personal relationship to sexual violence. And so this is one man speaking about the geography that he covers, or the people in his community. However, but I'd like to talk to the mothers and the sisters and the women in that community and see if they say the same thing. There's not victimization. This is a movement towards survivorship. We're not turning people into victims. These are people who once may have felt like victims, who see that there are millions of people around just like them, and we stand together as survivors. So there's no turning people into victims here.
You wrote a piece recently for Variety where you talked about, and this is something that we've talked about as well, perhaps more off camera than on, but you talked about the need to shift the focus of the movement away from Hollywood and the accused. Do you believe that this focus on Hollywood and famous people who have been accused, do you believe that it's hurt the movement? Do you believe that it may have hurt Professor Ford to a certain extent?
I think it's certainly been a setback for the movement, because so many people, like, the fact that Me Too is a thing is because everyday people use the hashtag. If this was really about what happened to Harvey Weinstein, we'd be calling this the Ronan Farrow effect, right? We'd be talking about this is the Weinstein effect. But this is more than that. What happened with Harvey Weinstein, and then everyday people were moved to say, you know what, this has happened to me too.
Yeah.
And what's happened over the last year, though, is that major media outlets haven't focused on the people who've said me too. And there's been so much focus on individual bad actors and individuals in Hollywood and things like that, that everyday people whose lives have been opened up, right, have no recourse and have no resources. And we keep coming back to the stories of these big, large figures, and we're not really talking about the everyday people or the systems of power and privilege that allow sexual violence to happen in their lives.
Why do you think that is? Why, or do you think it's just a classic case of us being journalists being, attracted to the shiny object?
I do.
Just being lazy, or?
Well, now that's your words. I'm not calling all journalists lazy,
Right.
but what I am saying is that there is a cycle of how we love salacious, gossipy headlines. We love celebrity. We love things that are shiny and make big headlines. But this is my thing. As a human being, if you saw that a hashtag affected 12 million people in 24 hours, that's the reality. 12 million people engaged with this hashtag in 24 hours after it went viral on just Facebook alone. Where are the headlines that say, my God, how has sexual violence affected our country? What's happening in the country that so many people's lives have been affected by that? We haven't seen that.
Tarana Burke, always enjoy your insight. Always enjoy your perspective. Thank you so much.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.